Thank you, everybody, for sticking around today and braving the weather. Hopefully we can get you out of here in decent time yet. But again, thanks for the introduction. My name is Peter Schneider. And again, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my experience with an educational audit, I guess I'll term it that, with the FDA that we had 2 years ago now. It seems hard to believe that that's been that long, but 2 years ago now. And just kind of my experience with that, give you guys some information. Hopefully you're aware of what to expect if somebody shows up at your doorstep. So again, if you have a similar situation, I'm sure when somebody comes to your door with an FDA credential and says, hey, we want to talk about your VFDs, you might have a similar reaction to my father. So when they showed up and talked to him, immediately he got on the phone with me and called me and said, hey, Pete, there's a couple guys here with the FDA and they want to review our VFDs. Are we going to jail? And so, again, I kind of thought it was a humorous reaction, but certainly one that was probably warranted given the situation. So today, again, hopefully with the information I give you, you guys can have a more confident reaction when they come and say, yeah, in fact, we're going to be good to go. So for all the audits, as far as I understand them, that are going to be going forward with the educational process or even with probably for-cause audits going forward in the future, the first step will be to show up at the feed mill. Probably the reason for this is because the feed mill's a stationary place and it's pretty easy to catch somebody there to go ahead and start with the VFD auditing process. But that's where it'll begin, and they'll review the VFDs at the feed mill. At that point in time, they'll select a handful that they want to then go further on, talk with some veterinarians that issued the VFDs, and then progress past that to the producers that actually fed the VFD medicated feed with their pigs. For our particular situation, we had two investigators show up to do the audit. One was with the FDA. The second was with the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, and we'll talk a little bit more why that individual is involved here in the future. But it's really a pretty simple process for the audit to happen. First, they just asked to see our VFDs that we had issued to that point in time. I think we only had like 4 or 5 to that point, so again, a pretty small sample size to go over. We allowed the investigators to go ahead and inspect those and fill out their audit form that they utilized to score those VFDs, and then give us some feedback. For our total process, really the whole process only took about an hour to do the audit. And again, I probably need to explain that for us, we do mix our own feed at our own feed mill. We don't sell to any other producers, just for our own use. So again, to catch the mill, the producer, and the veterinarian all in one was a pretty easy step for them to do. For the audit process, the investigators utilized this template, this form here to complete the audit. Wish I was able to give you guys a little bit bigger picture of this and show some more detail to it, but really overall, what it's looking for is the basic information that's needed on the VFD, and then ask about the compliance between the producer and the mills and how they handle those, as well as the storage of the VFDs for future review by the FDA or anybody else that would want to review the VFDs. So a question I get from a lot of people is maybe, how do I think my experience with the audit process would have related to theirs? And I think, again, overall, the audit process for me would have been similar for any producer or any veterinarian that would have gone through a similar process. Probably the biggest difference would have to be with the feed mills. And again, like I explained, we're really only mixing feed for our own purposes. So again, if you talk about a larger mill that's milling for a lot of different clients, they probably have a lot of different VFDs to go through. Again, the bulk number of them would be greater. But again, multiple different veterinarians and multiple different clients to have to review VFDs for. Probably the most important part of what I'm going to talk about today are some of these take-homes. I think you guys, again, maybe have questions about things that have come up maybe in your world, and hopefully give some detail as to what I learned from the process. So first of all, I think Chris kind of alluded to this earlier, the details on the VFDs are pretty important. One thing I wasn't doing a very good job of was specifying the timing of when the medicated feed was going to be in the bins, when the VFD should have been written for. So again, what they're looking for is some sort of a clarification as to the timing, say again 14 days to 28 days in the nursery for a course of CTC, or simply, again, it goes in ration number 2, which should only take 14 days, and again, you justify, or you have to specify the amount of time that the VFD is being issued for the usage. The justification for the VFD is also very important. So again, a clinical impression from a veterinarian that has a veterinary client-patient relationship with that client is very important. So if you're not currently interacting with a veterinarian to get a good VCPR in hand, I would recommend that you do that. Additional documentation such as diagnostics is also helpful, but not necessary as long as the veterinarian is willing to say, hey, we have this problem, this is the right medication for it, and we're going to go from there. One thing, again, also we took away from the audit process with the inspectors was beware of the double dip, okay? And by this I mean that one thing I had many clients doing at that time was using a pulse of CTC Denogard as an example in a nursery phase, and using a second pulse and maybe early finishing to help with ciliitis control. So in the mind of the FDA, again, we probably didn't need the CTC as part of that CTC Denogard to control ileitis. Not something we're normally going to reach for to help control that, and certainly not labeled there. So again, let's take that out. If we were to do a second course of CTC Denogard, say for a respiratory disease, they would ask the question, well, did the first course not work? Again, there's a little bit of some information that they're probably not understanding or not aware of, that, hey, we might have a course of flu early on, we may have a course of PRRS later on, we've got some secondary bacterials that usually go along with those, and maybe we want to do something about that. So maybe that's an educational piece. But again, for that second course of the same medication, to that singular group of pigs, we need specific justification for that second course. Not just a blanket for the entire flow for that particular lot of pigs requires some justification. One question that came up actually at the Iowa State Swine Disease Conference, I think it was a year ago now, when somebody from the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship was there answering some questions. And the question was, hey, we've got a group of sick pigs. My producer decides that, or we as the producer and the veterinarian decide that we need a certain antibiotic in the feed to help control the disease issue. What if we make a wrong decision? What if our diagnostics come back and say, this drug was resistant, this bug was resistant to this drug that we put in the feed? What do we do at that point in time? Do we have to finish the course of therapy? And in their impression it was, no, we really don't. We can go ahead and switch that. So again, get a truck there, back the feed out, shut the slide and get it taken out later, but get the right product in. And it's okay if we don't finish the course of therapy as long as we've got justification for that. Now, one thing that they wanted to stress was that, hey, we've got 10 days into a disease break, we decided to use Pulmotil 4, and everything's looking better. We don't want to pay for the next 11 days worth of Pulmotil feed in the ration. That is not going to be acceptable. Go ahead and discontinue the course of therapy at that point in time. Okay, cost is not an appropriate means for discontinuing the antibiotic therapy. I was able to follow back up with the FDA inspector that came out to our farm here about a year ago now, and I asked him, what's the biggest area of weakness that you're seeing when you're doing these audits? And for him, the biggest area was producer records. So what they're finding is producers are not keeping the VFDs that are being issued for them on hand and able to produce if they have an inspection process. And then that's really the biggest area where they're seeing lack of compliance. And so again, remember, we need to hang on to those VFDs for 2 years and go forward from there. So again, continue to keep those on hand and make them available so that if you do get audited. And these audits are not optional, okay? So even though the FDA is coming out and saying, hey, our emphasis right now is educate before regulate, and it's kind of what the term that they were using, you're still going to have to go through this if you get picked to go ahead and have the audit process, okay? If you decide, hey, I really don't want to do this process, so that's fine, what they'll do at that point in time is they'll turn it into a for-cause audit, which means that if we come back with some deficiencies in our VFD process, if we've got things even small, they can result in the penalty. Whereas in the current mentality, or the mentality that was being taken when my audit happened, it was more or less, hey, as long as it's nothing that's majorly egregious, that we don't see somebody that's trying to flout the law there, that again, we're gonna help you out with the process and give you the right answers and move on from there. The FDA does not have the resource to complete these audits on their own, okay? So that was why the individual from the Department of Agriculture was at my audit. They'll be doing a lot of these processes, a lot of these audits, just to help the FDA out. So again, I think it may be a time frame where, hey, if you can get to know some of your state inspectors, get to know some of those people, help with the education for understanding, what happens in our industry, it may be beneficial for you and for all of us in the future. Again, talking with producers, I often get the question, how prepared are we for this? Am I going to be okay if I got somebody that walks in my door and wants to see my VFDs? And really, I think at the end of the day, most of the producers are fairly well prepared, okay? things like Global Vet Link, things like again the third-party VFD systems, I think do a pretty good job. Most veterinarians that I've talked with or have seen the VFDs that they're issuing, again, they're pretty spot on. Again, the biggest thing is making sure we're following the directions that are labeled in the VFD. And going from there. But I think, again, you're going to be surprised that if you ever got audited, you're probably in a better place than what you feel like you are today. And I do remain positive about the experience. I think, again, it was good for me to understand maybe some deficiencies in my own VFD process and to, again, be able to talk to you guys today and give more information about what I learned. So if you do have the opportunity to go through with one of these, I think it's better to do this than to have somebody come in your door and say, hey, you weren't doing this right, and here's the penalty. So again, I don't know where the FDA is at today in their mindset. Maybe Chris knows better than I. But again, last time I talked to them, they were going to continue on with the educate before regulate mentality until. So looks like Tyler's shaking his head that maybe that's changed now. So again, but with that, that's really the last that I had. I do want to thank the individuals with the FDA, Scott Jepson, and the individual with IDALS, Jerry Van de Voorde, for helping me out with some additional questions and again, having a, I guess, positive experience for me. So thank you.